Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ seminar on the Cyprus issue. ΝΕΠΟMAK is a world organisation for young overseas Cypriots, and we cater for our members with a range of cultural, business networking and social events. This event has been organised by the ΝΕΠΟΜAK Cyprus Action Team, the campaigning side of the organisation, and this is the first event of its kind in Britain. May I start by welcoming our speakers here today, George Iorio, the Consul General of the Republic of Cyprus here in Britain, and the current President of the Consular Corps of London. Marina Yannakoudakis, a member of the European Parliament for London, who campaigns vigorously for Cyprus at a European level. Dr. Gliarchos Kyriakidis, a qualified solicitor and lecturer at the University of Hertfordshire, who has published countless papers on the Cyprus issue. And finally, Anna Averkiou, a media and communications consultant and former BBC journalist for the BBC World Service and producer and news editor of the award-winning programme World Today. Thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. Now, the motivation behind this seminar stemmed from our existing campaigning activities on the Cyprus issue. ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ is committed to seeing a peaceful resolution to the division of Cyprus in accordance with the efforts of the Republic to achieve a bizonal, bicommunal federation. As a youth organisation here in Britain, with a large and varied membership, from students to young professionals, ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ is in a unique position to communicate the desire of young Britons of Cypriot descent to see a peaceful resolution to the Cyprus issue. We speak regularly with British politicians, civil servants, and the mainstream media in expressing our desire for a solution. During today's seminar, after hearing from our distinguished speakers, I am confident that you will all leave enriched and informed of the current position of the peace talks and the steps that we, as young Cypriots living in Britain, could be taking to help bring about peace in Cyprus. Without further delay, Peter Tcherelambis, the President of ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ UK, would like to say a few welcoming words before we move on to hearing from our guest speakers today.
First and foremost, once again, a thank you to George, Marina, Gliarchos and Anna on behalf of ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ UK. We're honoured to have you here and the fact that you've given your time to us as well. As second and third generation young Cypriots, we have the opportunity to hear firsthand today from our speakers who, through their various fields, have helped to promote the Cyprus issue, educate others, both within our community and, of course, spreading the message outside as well, driving forward change. Finally, what I hope we can all get out of this seminar today is a sense of perspective on how each and every one of us can make a difference, firstly by educating ourselves on Cyprus, how to keep up to date, how to effectively lobby both individually and collectively for Cyprus, so that ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ UK can engage and empower the young community here in the UK.
And if we start with George Iorio, the Consul General of the Republic of Cyprus, to say some welcoming remarks.
Their initiative to bring us together to discuss the Cyprus question, one of the longest-standing international problems, which unfortunately still has not found its solution and remains the main preoccupation for the Cypriot diplomacy. And not only, should I say, the Cyprus question runs through every dimension and every level of the public domain in Cyprus, affecting people's lives in many ways. There is no Cypriot that is not touched by the continuous existence of the problem. My generation, to give an example, for the last 38 years, every single day lives with the Cyprus problem. We wake up in the morning listening about the Cyprus problem, and we go to bed at night again listening for the Cyprus problem. From the early morning, the radio stations Cyprus broadcast discussions relating to the Cyprus question. Late at night, the TV channels always include at least one news item directly related to this issue. During the course of the day, the newspapers are full with various commentaries on the Cyprus question, most of them on the front pages. In school, the Cyprus question is more or less part of the curriculum. In the social life, as most of you may know from your own family's experience, politics are always on the agenda, and in particular, the developments on the Cyprus question. Even the Cypriots in the diaspora, of whom many choose to leave their homeland because they became refugees in 1974, are also affected to a significant extent by the Cyprus question. Today's event is a vivid demonstration of this. And of course, it proves that generations like yours, born in this country after the Turkish invasion of 1974, with no other affiliation to Cyprus apart from your immediate family's roots, are still interested and engaged with this issue in a very vigorous manner. Due to the time elapsed since 1974, though, many people tend to forget or to fall for distorted facts surrounding the problem, neglecting its substance, which I would like to remind before I proceed with the main issue of my speech. The Cyprus problem is in its essence an international problem of violation of the international law, namely Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the Charter of the United Nations, which reads, "All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations." Turkey has violated and continues to violate this law. The particular violation resulted in a series of other abuses related to the basic human rights of the Cypriot people. There are 200,000 refugees that forcibly fled their homes, thousands were killed, and hundreds are still missing, amongst them non-combatants, like children, women, and elderly people. 37% of the Cypriot territory, the most fertile, has been lost, as well as the 70% of the island's productive potential. These were the immediate effects at the time and just after the invasion, between July and August 1974. Many other devastating consequences have followed, of which I would like to highlight the absolute dreadful exploitation of Greek Cypriot properties, of which some are used as private residences and others as recreation facilities. The influx of tens of thousands of settlers to the extent that the native Turkish Cypriot community is in danger of extinction. Much of the rich cultural heritage in the occupied areas, which is part of the world's cultural heritage, has been destroyed and vandalized, and places of worship have been desecrated. The Cyprus question has not affected and does not affect only the Cypriots. It has an effect on very important international issues. Turkey's accession to the European Union is one of them. A second is, of course, the relations between Greece and Turkey, two very important NATO members, and a third is the maintenance of the balance of power in the highly sensitive area of the Eastern Mediterranean, which has now proven to be a vast reserve of hydrocarbons and potentially of oil. Let me also remind you that Cyprus is in close proximity to the combustible Middle East, an area that has been and still is the theater of a complex interaction of international interests. No wonder Cyprus question is still current, worthy of everyone's attention, and definitely in need to be resolved. I will not talk further on the history. I will not elaborate on the implication of the Cyprus question. I will go straight into the main topic, and I want to be very clear that I will talk about the latest developments which cover the period since September 2008, when the new round of the direct negotiations between the leaders of the two communities began. For purposes of analysis, I will separate the two periods from September 2008 to March 2010 and from April 2010 until today. The first period is when Mr. Mehmet Ali Talat was the leader of the Turkish Cypriot community, and the second is when Mr. Dervish Eroglu replaced him as a leader of his community. In September 2008, President Christofias, in his capacity as the leader of the Greek Cypriot community, and the then Turkish Cypriot leader Mehmet Ali Talat, embarked on direct negotiations under the Good Offices mission of the Secretary General of the United Nations. The basis of the negotiation, and this is important to note, was that the solution of the problem will be a bicommunal, bizonal federation with political equality as described in the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions, for a state with one and single sovereignty, one and single citizenship, and one and single international personality. The negotiation was split into 6 chapters, with the 7th one, the settlers, to be discussed at the conclusion. Those chapters were governance and constitutional issues, economy, European Union, properties, territory, security and guarantees. The two leaders discussed the first 3 chapters, on which they came to some important convergences, without though reaching a full agreement. Some divergences continued to exist, and by no means were the chapters discussed ever considered settled. After all, a rule of the negotiation is that nothing is agreed unless everything is agreed. Our position is that this particular negotiating period could be more fruitful and rewarding, provided that the Turkish Cypriot side was more constructive and fully orientated on the agreed basis of the solution, as described above. Even Mr. Talat, who was presenting himself as a moderate force, could not avoid the temptation to deviate towards elements that were leading to the confederation or loose federation as a final solution for Cyprus. An example of that was his proposal on how the international relations of the future state should be conducted. In his twofold proposal in January 2010 on this particular issue, on the one hand, he suggested that the two component units, or states, or whatever they were to be called, should be able to sign international agreements on every field, and on the other hand, he suggested that the central government should sign international, or would be able to sign international agreements only after the permission of the relevant authorities of its two component units. This was clearly divisive and was duly rejected. It has to be stressed, however, that the convergences reached by the two leaders had created expectations for further progress. These expectations were shared especially amongst the international community. This was just before the beginning of the negotiation of the next and very crucial chapter, the chapter on properties. But, and there is always a but in the Cyprus problem, in April 2010, a voting procedure took place in the occupied part of Cyprus, which brought to the leadership of the Turkish Cypriot community Mr. Dervish Eroglu. It is worth noting, so someone can get a sense for what political views the Turkish Cypriots were voting for, that Mr. Eroglu, during his campaign, advocated for a separate state in the occupied part of Cyprus and never failed to remind voters of the two peoples and the two states that exist, according to him, on the island. With such political views, many observers expressed doubts and fears for the future of the negotiations process. Assuming the role of the negotiator, Mr. Eroglu quickly shed plentiful light on his intentions. He had firstly said that he is not bound on what was agreed behind closed doors, to use his expression. He was referring to the convergences reached between President Christofias and Mr. Talat. And secondly, he has repeated once more his position on the two states and two people in Cyprus, which was in complete contradiction to the agreed basis of the negotiation. He has never since, even under pressure by the United Nations, explicitly clarified that he is negotiating on the agreed basis. This divergence from the agreed basis was illustrated in his proposals on the chapter of properties. Quite simply, the Turkish proposals on the issue were aiming to legalizing the current de facto situation of division with two ethnically cleansed zones. Mr. Eroglu's position on this crucial issue is that the people currently living in the Greek Cypriot properties must have the right to remain there should they decide so, which effectively means that the refugees are deprived for their right to return. No need to say that this position constitutes a violation of one of the basic human rights. Our position was and still is that the legal owner must have the priority to decide whether he or she would like to return and not anyone else to decide for him. With this approach by the Turkish side, and the above is just a small example of this approach, there is no way forward. And as it happens, there has not been much progress since, something which was unfortunately reaffirmed by the two most recent meetings of the two leaders at the Green Tree in New York in the presence of the United Nations Secretary General. The Turkish side, on both occasions, has shown unwillingness to enter into substantial negotiation. They still refuse to provide maps on the territory they intend to return, and therefore there is no indication of the number of refugees that will be able to return under the Greek Cypriot component unit in the future Cypriot federated state. They also refuse to provide data on the number of the settlers now residing in the occupied area of Cyprus, which would have been most helpful in determining the number of the people affected in future territorial adjustments. More disturbingly, the Turkish Cypriot side has actually backtracked on prior convergences, like the one on the issue of the election of the executive, which was achieved during the negotiations with Mr. Talat. Effectively, the Turkish Cypriot side does not negotiate, and instead they push for an international conference, which they believe with some reason, I have to say, will add pressure to the Greek Cypriots to accept a solution plan which will be drafted to the Turkish measures. They are basically aiming for a repeat of the unfortunate 2004 procedure in Burkestonk. President Christofias has made it clear that the conditions for the convening of such a conference remain those outlined by the United Nations Secretary General in his opening statement at the Green Tree meeting and in line with the most recent United Nations Security Council resolution, namely that all internal aspects of a settlement must be resolved beforehand and that the two sides will have to give their consent for this to happen. It is very clear from what I've said that there are no developments to warrant an international conference, and therefore there is no justification to convene one. Let me finish by demonstrating who we believe is the catalyst, or the key, as they say, for a solution to the Cyprus problem. This is Turkey. Turkey holds a firm grip on the occupied areas. The presence of 40,000 Turkish troops gives her the military and security control. The substantial financial support to the regime in the occupied area, which comes directly from the Turkish state's budget, gives her control of the economy. The influx of tens of thousands of settlers allows her the political control. Very little happens in the occupied Cyprus which doesn't get the endorsement of the Turkish government. And as far as the negotiations for the Cyprus problem are concerned, the Turkish government is the one that definitely calls the shots. It is common secret to all the observers of the Cyprus problem that all the proposals presented by Mr. Eroglu during the negotiations are drafted to the last letter by the Turkish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. All the Turkish governments we observe that have seen Cyprus as an issue of national security and of paramount importance to their strategic interests. The current Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ahmet Davutoglu, wrote a very interesting book on the foreign affairs priorities of the Turkish state. Mr. Davutoglu was very explicit on his views on Cyprus. I will just use one catchphrase from his book, which is entitled Strategic Depth, the International Position of Turkey. Very interesting book indeed. And I read, even if no Muslim Turk ever existed in Cyprus, Turkey ought to maintain a Cyprus issue. A country that ignores Cyprus cannot become an important regional actor. Crystal clear, isn't it? And if someone thinks that this is just in the realm of the academy, due to Mr. Davutoglu's past as a distinguished university professor, you will be interested to learn that Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan very recently repeated exactly the same position with different words and a bit more diplomatically. Mr. Erdogan was responding to the demonstrations by the Turkish Cypriots which took place last year. I quote his exact words. They are telling Turkey to get out of northern Cyprus. Who do you think you are? What Greece is doing there is the same as what Turkey is doing there strategically. So much about the interest of the Turkish Cypriots that Turkey is supposedly defending. More specifically, and on why there is no progress or developments on the Cyprus question on this latest stage, I need to quote once more Mr. Erdogan. During his illegal presence on the occupied part of Cyprus on the occasion of the anniversary of the Turkish invasion, he said, Morphu is not in my book. The Greek Cypriots, they will wait for Varosha for a much longer time. Mr. Erdogan rejected basically the return of both towns to the Greek Cypriots. If we acknowledge that the three remaining chapters to be negotiated, properties, territory, and security and guarantees, are the chapters on which Turkey has to come with some concessions, then we can clearly presume that the Turkish Prime Minister has declared the end of the negotiation on the Turkish side. His Minister for European Affairs, Mr. Egemen Bayish, repeats on every occasion his now trademark slogan. When the sun shines on your beautiful island, it is a fact that it shines on two different states with two different democratically elected presidents, two different parliaments, two different school systems, two health systems, and so forth. These are his words from last Wednesday's lecture he gave at the London School of Economics, but repeated time and time again on the many occasions he visits Brussels. Now, this is another serious statement indicating, if not proving, that what Turkey is after is not a negotiated settlement of the problem that will reunify Cyprus, but the legalization of today's de facto partition of the island. How else we can explain this persistence on two of everything in Cyprus? Reasonably, someone can ask, I already given the answer, I believe, is Turkey willing to seriously negotiate a solution of the Cyprus problem? Our position is that Turkey, for her own reasons, is not ready to see the problem resolved and is not really willing to make concrete steps towards this direction. The Cyprus question is definitely high on the agenda of the Turkish foreign policy, but I have my doubts whether this is an immediate priority. It remains to be seen, though, whether the new developments relating to the potential exploitation of the hydrocarbon reserves in the Cypriot exclusive economic zone will change the dynamics on the Cyprus question and the priorities of the policymakers in the Turkish establishment. At the moment, we only receive threats and intimidation and further violations of our territorial integrity by the Turkish naval vessels and aircrafts. As I'm sure you can understand, this stance cannot be perceived as evidence of goodwill and good intentions. Let me conclude by saying that in view of the next report of the United Nations Security Generals and the many overtures from some quarters to resolve the problem by the 1st of July 2012, the day that the Republic of Cyprus is assuming the presidency of the European Union, it is imperative for the international community to communicate to Turkey in the strongest possible terms that the leadership of the Turkish Cypriot community ought to, at last, clearly demonstrate, in deeds, not just words, its commitment for a just and comprehensive settlement which will truly reunify Cyprus. Dear friends, I'm sure I have omitted much of what you may want to hear, but I understand that there's going to be a question and answer session. Please feel free to ask, and I will try to the best, as best I can, to give definite answers. I want once more to thank ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ for this occasion and wish you all the best in your endeavors to lobby on behalf of the government of the Republic of Cyprus. Your efforts, I have to repeat again, they are greatly valued by this government of the Republic of Cyprus and all the governments that preceded it. Thank you very much.
Has anyone seen my big fat Greek wedding? Has anyone seen it? You must have all seen it, yeah. Can you relate with it in any way at all? Because when I saw it, I thought I was that little girl who was made to eat moussaka at school. And I think that's the challenge you've got here. You're fitting into a multicultural London, but you've got to keep your culture, your Greek roots, and you've got to keep this Greek flame alive in a second and third generation, which is going to become increasingly more difficult as you marry outside, xenos. I mean, I married a xeno. He was Greek from Greece. My son is going to marry a real xeni. She's from Japan. So it's going to get more and more. But it's very important that we keep the Greek going. And someone said, why did you write your brochure in Greek? It's because it's important, and you guys have to put Greek in your literature as well. We have to try and keep it going somehow. I mean, you can't read it very well, but you try. I made my kids go to Greek school, and you'll probably do the same to yours, and good luck to them, because I hated it. And I'm sure you all hated it. But the important thing is, though, that ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ is a social ground for you meeting socially, and also exchanging political ideas, because the political ideas are going to keep the Cyprus issue on the agenda, unless it gets solved beforehand. So I'm going to go into 3 sections. First of all, I'm going to talk about what I do as an MEP and what my role is. Then I'm going to tell you how you can assist me, which is always a good thing. And then I'm going to suggest some things you can do to assist yourselves and make it work. So what do? I'm an MEP for London. For the whole of London, I represent 8 million people, Cypriots, Greek and Turkish Cypriots. So we have to be aware of that. My main job is I'm a spokesman for women issues, and I noticed the girls are sitting on the second row. Not good. Ladies, always push away to the front, because they're not going to give it to you. So I'm women's spokesman, and I'm also a spokesman for health issues. So that's really the crunch of what I do mainly. Because I am of Greek Cypriot origin, I am very conscious of the fact that I can be labelled a one-issue MEP. If I talk too much about Cyprus, then everything else I do will be put on the side and people will not take me seriously. And if you're planning on going into political careers, you have to bear in mind that you are British from Greek origin and you have to concentrate on all areas that affect the UK. So I'm very conscious of my work to do with Cyprus, but then again, I am of Cypriot origin, so obviously I want to do as much as I can. Which is why I belong to two Greek groups in Parliament. The first one I'll just mention very quickly, it's called FERUM, which is to do with the former Republic of Macedonia, former Republic of Yugoslavia, which is, they're trying to get the Macedonian name put in, but we're trying to keep it off. And that's really to help the Greeks. And the next thing I do, which is my main area for Cyprus, is I'm a member of the high-level contact group for Turkish Cypriot relationships. Turkish Cypriot relationships. Now, this was formed when Cyprus became a member of the EU in 2004, whenever. Shows. Part of the agreement of Cyprus getting into the EU was because their MEPs were going to be Cypriot, they had to have this contact group which would keep an eye on what the Turkish Cypriots wanted in the occupied zone. So our function is to really go over to Cyprus and to have speakers and see what's going on and find out where the talks are going and how we can make sure that the Turkish Cypriot problems are not left behind. And they have got a lot of problems because they are also living in an occupied part of Cyprus. Whichever way you do it, they are not Turkish residents, they are Turkish Cypriots. And a lot of them don't want the Turkish army there, they don't want the settlers, and they feel that they're being thrown out of their country. In fact, one of my visits, one of them said to me, I'm just a Cypriot who speaks Turkish. Another one said, if you don't do something to help us soon, we'll have to leave. We can't stay here with these Turkish invaders. So one of the things I do in the high-level contact group is I'm very conscious and I keep it on the agenda that Cyprus is occupied. And there are some people on the contact group who will not accept that Cyprus is occupied. When we go over, we meet with the president, we meet with all the political parties, both the Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots. We attend something that is organised, I think, once a month by the Slovakian ambassador, who calls in the political parties from both Cypriots and Turkish Cypriots, and they discuss issues and how they feel, and they try and come up with a common resolution, which was a drastic situation. They were there arguing about a simple word. It's the different parties which are trying to get together, and which is always a difficult thing. We meet with Aroglu and his team. We meet with the UN and Alexander Down Under, who his perception of the Greek problem never ceases to amaze me. We need to do something about him, as I've suggested already. What we actually do, that we produce a report. Now, this report is actually now with a Conference of Presidents, so I can't actually talk about it. But when it comes through, if you want, we can bring it here and you can look at it and we can discuss it, because that will give you an analysis from the European Union's perspective of what's going on with all the different areas and how the different stakeholders are playing. Because I am of Greek origin, obviously, the Turkish Cypriot authorities look at me with some suspicion. In fact, when I first went to Parliament, I had a little visit from some very tall, hunky men, not very pleasant looking. There were about 5 of them who came to my office. They wanted to see me. And the first thing they did when they came in, they gave me their business cards, and they said, what do they call themselves? Northern Turkish Republic or something. I looked at it and I said, well, I'm sorry, this doesn't exist. So if you're coming to see me from here, I can't see you. I'm terribly sorry. If you're coming to see me as a Turkish Cypriot, my door is open. So they took their cards away and they said, we're here as Turkish Cypriots. No problem, sit down. And basically they had about half an hour in the office trying to suss me out, trying to find out where I stood. Well, I said to them, I'm neutral, I'm a British MEP, and I'm here to look after everyone's interests who are Cypriot. But it got to the stage when I mentioned the missing persons, for example, they said, have you got a person missing? Well, no, I haven't. But it's a humanitarian issue. So it's quite difficult on the high-level contact group because they look at you, yeah, you know that word? You know, as if you're sort of... last time I was there, we were at the meeting with Eroglu and his team, and my team, all of us lot, and he gave his take on everything, which was very different to the Cypriot take, I must admit. And at the end, we all have a chance to speak. Now, I knew that whatever I would say, they would have taken the wrong way. So I did what was the next best thing. And at the time, there had been a problem with homosexuality, and they still have the law there. So I approached him on that, and I asked him about human rights. And that was an area where he couldn't walk away from, and we could actually come to some agreement. Later on, it followed by some letters. He still hasn't repealed the law. I'm still after him. But the point is, you've got to divert it and send a curved ball, but still be on the playing field sometimes, as British politicians with a Greek background. So the high-level contact group, we will talk at another time, because I can't really say a lot of what we're doing, because it's still at a confidential stage. When the report's printed, by all means, contact me. What else can I do in Parliament, the European Parliament? Well, as you know, we've done a written declaration, and you were there, and we got it through, and that was great. And a written declaration is equivalent to an early day motion in the British Parliament, and it's something that Parliament says it's its wish. We did that on missing persons. There was one that just got passed on Famagusta, which is brilliant. Missing persons was an easier one to pass because it was humanitarian. Famagusta had a political swing to it, so it was difficult, and the fact that it got passed was brilliant. So we can do written declarations. One of the other things which is very important are events, which was a fantastic pictures of faces of Cyprus. They were very good, actually. They were Greek Cypriots, Turkish Cypriots, Cypriots from the UK. And it was all the different, and it was very good because then parliamentarians would just pop by and see it. We had an exhibition, people were coming in for reception, and it gives them a sort of a concept of what Cyprus is and the different types of people that can be there. It gives them some sort of understanding. Another one that was very important was the missing persons of Cyprus. Again, the topic is discussed, and it puts it onto the agenda. So one of the important things we do there is raise awareness. And we raise awareness to 27 member states, politicians who belong to, and they can go back afterwards to their member state, and that therefore they can support the UK. The Cypriot stance. Another thing which we do is we bring groups over to Brussels, and I'm hoping that you guys will come over soon. And what we can do when you come over is arrange a programme, a lobby programme, where you will meet MPs and you'll be able to put forward your what you do and how you see your position and what you hope for as Greek Cypriots. I'd like Turkish Cypriots to be there as well, and then we can make it more even-handed, because it's important to be even-handed. So, as an MEP, I hope that to help Cyprus, I can open doors. So those are really just a little snippet of what I do. How can you assist me? Canvassing. Turning up on time, Jason, always helps. Not turning up for the lunch, the free lunch. Canvassing is always a good thing. Obviously, I need to get re-elected. That is a bit of a problem, because although I'll be happy if you all vote for me when the election comes in 2014, I've got to get onto this list first, and that way Conservative members only, Andrew, can put me number one of the list. So I need to be put number one out of the 3 MEPs so I can get through finally to the final stage. So that's how you can help me, and then we can do the canvassing, the election. But really, you as ΝΕΠΟΜΑΚ need to go forward and stand near politicians from all parties, and it's important that you get all parties, it's a cross-party thing, and show them that you are there supporting them, but there's a payback. There's always a payback in life, nothing like a free meal. So what can you do? Yeah, you need to support your elected officials. You need to tell your elected officials what you want. You need to keep an eye out on things that are coming up in Parliament, in the European Parliament. The other day I met some Tamils, for example. I know nothing about the Tamils. Just like British MEPs know nothing about the Cypriot issue. I met them, I said, yes, of course I'll support you. There was a resolution in Parliament. It had to do with the Tamils. Of course, I wasn't involved in it. I voted as I was told by the party line. It wasn't what the Tamils wanted. Now, of course, I'm going to go and find out why we voted that way, because the Tamils told me. But if they had told me beforehand, I would ensure that the vote was supporting their issue. So you need to be proactive as opposed to after the event. Having events like this and inviting other members of Parliament, councillors are very important because they're the next members of Parliament, MEPs. You need to invite councillors and members of European Parliament, officials in the party, policy makers, to give them your take on what's going on in Cyprus. So I think that's about all you can do. Now, as far as supporting me, or as far as knowing what I do a monthly newsletter in English. So you can either enroll or give me your email and I'll enroll you. I'm on Facebook. I also do that twit thing, you know, constantly. So you can keep up and you can interact with things. But don't bombard me on Facebook with too much Greek stuff, because I've got loads of friends and I don't want them to think I'm just going for the Greek stuff. Get hold of me by email by all means if you want me. If there's something you think I should keep an eye on.
Moving on, Dr. Glakos Giliakidis, University of Hertfordshire lecturer and qualified solicitor, will say a few words on Cyprus.
When I was 18, it was the 1988 United States presidential election, and the Democrats selected as their nominee the governor of Massachusetts, who was called Michael Dukakis, and he was of Greek origin. And I remember watching Newsnight, I think it was at the time, with Peter Snow, and there was a gentleman from the South who appeared on the programme to be interviewed. And remember, the South was the capital of segregation in America, the capital of racial politics. And this gentleman proclaimed that in the United States of America, no politician with a surname which included 2 Ks could ever expect to become President of the United States of America. This was a quarter of a century ago, way before Barack Obama. And that had me thinking, because I had 2 Ks in my name. I chose not to go into politics as such, but I'm very pleased to see that Marina has been elected to Parliament with 2 Ks in her surname. But that shows you, I have more than 2, but that shows you really what you can achieve. In this country, whatever its flaws and defects, you can reach the top in politics, you can reach the top in government, you can reach the top in business, you can reach the top in art. Whatever field of work you wish to go into, you can reach the top. And that's something that we've benefited from over the past quarter of a century. When I was growing up in the 70s, it was the era in which there was a great deal of discrimination faced by Greeks, blacks, Asians and others, purely on the basis of their race or religion. And we've benefited from the change in the political climate in this country. So I wanted to open with that thought. I've been invited to really say two main things today. One is offer a few thoughts on the Cyprus question, and then a few thoughts as to how you can become involved in politics. I haven't become involved in party politics, but I've certainly been involved in the political system. I saw the foothills of Her Majesty's Armed Forces as a civilian research fellow, as an academic at the Royal Air Force Staff College, as it then was, and I was involved also in an academic workshop that was overseen by the Chief of the Air Staff, the service head of the Royal Air Force. I was also involved in tutoring the armed forces for 13 years on an occasional basis. So I've seen the armed forces, and by extension the Ministry of Defence and the British government, from that vantage point. I've also practiced in the legal profession, and I've become a very active member of the representative side of the legal profession through the Law Society nationally, and more specifically through 2 local law societies. So I've seen how the legal profession functions, and I haven't reached the top by any stretch of the imagination, but I can at a moment's notice make contact with people at the top of the legal profession, and that's given me an opportunity to kick the government on several occasions and expose what we regard in the profession as inappropriate policies by all the parties, as it happens. So I've been involved in politics in that way, and thirdly, as an academic, I've been able to contribute through writing and through lectures to public discourse. I've tended to write about Cyprus and the Eastern Mediterranean and then switch. I've written about the Office of Attorney General, for example, the Office of Attorney General here. I've contributed to the discussions and debates about the role of the law officers of this country. To what I've also discussed the role that law should, and the rule of law should play in our political system. So over the years I've deliberately written about Cyprus, but I've also swung away and written about things that are of more mainstream interest to this country. And that, in a way, is a development of the point that Marina has just made. Anyway, let me just go through quickly the spade is a spade one. On the Cyprus question, it's important to just have our terminology correct, because it is so easy to abuse language. I begin in this paper by going back to George Orwell. George Orwell spoke of the importance of restating the obvious. This was back in 1939, when the dictators in Europe were trying to stretch words beyond their natural meaning in order to make a political point. And George Orwell reminded us that it is dangerous to abuse words, and he spoke of us descending into an age in which 2 and 2 will make 5 when the leader says so. Words are important. Words carry meaning, and as a lawyer, I spend my life, and I did when I was in practice, spent my working days playing with words, using words, deploying words, and ultimately it's important that we use correct terminology. We're all familiar with the mantra that's repeatedly trotted out by the Turkish government, of whichever political persuasion it happens to be, that in 1974 Turkish forces landed on the island of Cyprus and they embarked upon a peace operation. Now that's a mantra that continues to be trotted out. We're also familiar with the Whitehallese, if I may use that expression, the words that the weasel words used by British ministers to try and camouflage the reality of what occurred in 1974. That's why we repeatedly hear British ministers talk about the events of 1974 or the military action of 1974. The other one that they use, the hostilities of 1974. Somehow, and for some reason, British ministers can't bring themselves to refer to what occurred in 1974 as an invasion, and they can't bring themselves to refer to the consequences of that invasion as an occupation. Now, the words are important here because I've just already mentioned the Second World War. The Second World War amounted to a campaign of armed aggression by Germany, Italy, and other countries. Those countries invaded and occupied territories. In some respects, and in some cases, the Germans in particular flushed out of the territory they occupied the people who were the permanent inhabitants. They engaged in what's commonly referred to as ethnic cleansing. As far as the Jews were concerned, they targeted the Jews on the basis of their race and religion, and not only uprooted them from their homes, but incarcerated them in camps and exterminated them in their millions. And as a result of what occurred in the Second World War, the victorious powers, which were led by the United Kingdom, the United States, the Soviet Union, and even though it had been occupied for much of the war, France, as well as China, decided that the rule of law would triumph over the rule of the gun. And in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War, a series of international treaties were unfurled to underline the primacy of the rule of law. These included the United Nations Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights, the Genocide Convention, the additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions. Regrettably, in 1974 and on previous occasions, those treaties were disregarded and violated by Turkey in particular. The invasion was a violation of Article 2.4 of the United Nations Charter, and the Consul General has already made that point vividly in his presentation. The occupation was a violation of the United Nations Charter. The expulsion of people from their homes on the basis of their race or religion was arguably genocide, arguably a violation of unquestionably a violation of the Geneva Conventions. It was unquestionably a violation of the European Convention of Human Rights. The implantation of colonists or settlers, in an echo of what Hitler did with Lebensraum in occupied Europe, is a violation of the additional protocol to the Geneva Convention of 1949. It's prohibited. I could go on and on with examples of violations of international law perpetrated by Turkey, but regrettably, Turkey is part of the culture of that region, which gives primacy to the gun and gives primacy to the leadership as opposed to the citizen. And we're seeing that played out in Syria at the moment, where the dictator of Syria is treating human beings as if they're cattle. And he is unrestrained by any court, he's unrestrained by any law, and as far as he is concerned, the gun has primacy. And that tendency in that part of the world was played out in 1974, and it is still played out today with the ongoing occupation of the Republic. Now, why am I saying all of this? I'm saying all of this because the words invasion and occupation are of fundamental importance. And some people from even our community are afraid to use them because they're afraid that they'll upset people and they're not diplomatic. And yet we should not be afraid, not just as people of Greek Cypriot origin, but as citizens of this country and as British people who are the custodians of the rule of law. And we are the custodians of the United Nations Charter, because the United Kingdom is a permanent member of the Security Council. It was the driving force behind the introduction of all of those treaties I mentioned. And we must remember that when we talk about the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom consists of 3 branches of government, arguably 4 with the European Union. But the 3 branches of government in the domestic sphere are the executive branch in Whitehall, which is presided over by the Prime Minister and the government ministries. There is the Parliament at Westminster, consisting of the 2 houses. But there's the 3rd branch of government that people often overlook, which is the court. We have the Supreme Court at the top. We also have the Court of Appeal, the High Court, and other courts further down. But when we talk, therefore, about the courts have a function to identify and interpret the law. That is their constitutional duty. And they identify and interpret the law on behalf of the United Kingdom and for the United Kingdom. So what I've done in my little paper is I've just referred to a number of recent court cases where the judges in this country were faced with spillovers of the Cyprus question. And what has struck me in these cases is that the judges have repeatedly chosen to use the words invasion and occupation to refer to what occurred in 1974. So an example is the case of Apostolidis and Orams, which reached the Court of Appeal in 2010. When the case was brought before the High Court, I don't want to go into the facts of the case, I just want to focus on this single point. When the case reached the High Court, the Apostolidis family lost and the Orams family won. But even in the High Court where Mr. Apostolidis lost, Mr. Justice Jack, the High Court judge, referred to Turkey having invaded the Republic and in the process procuring the effective expulsion of Greek Cypriots from much of the area that was occupied. When the case reached the European Court of Justice, which is the court of the European Union, the European Court of Justice referred to the Turkish invasion. When the case came back to London and went up to the Court of Appeal, Lord Justice Pill referred to Turkey having invaded the Republic of Cyprus. Now, that's an important use of word, because lawyers are chosen to choose their words with scrupulous care. I spent 3 years as an undergraduate, I spent another year as a postgraduate, I spent 2 years as a trainee, and I had to choose each word with absolute clarity and care. And no judge would use the word invasion or the word occupation if they didn't mean what they were saying. And we have a number of other cases, and I've listed them in the notes, and you can read them in your own time. Another example is Polypek and Marangos, where the word armed invasion was used. Yolari and the Secretary of State for Transport at Judicial Review. There was another one where the words invasion and occupation were used. Even the Supreme Court, in a recent case relating to Northern Ireland, referred to the Turkish invasion of northern Cyprus. Most recently, we have a decision of the European Court of Human Rights, Lordos and Turkey, in which a panel of European Court of Human Rights judges, presided over by the British judge, Sir Nicholas Bratzer, referred to the Turkish invasion. So that's important. That's important because that, as far as I'm concerned, removes any doubt whatsoever. Turkey invaded the Republic of Cyprus in 1974. It procured the ethnic cleansing of Greek Cypriots from the northern areas on the basis of their race and religion in a discriminatory manner. And that occupation is still going on to this day. So let's just not have any more said about that. It's beyond doubt that this was an invasion and occupation. Everything flows on from that. I depart from the Consul General and the Republic of Cyprus government, and indeed from НΕΠΟΜΑΚ, from what I heard earlier, as to the viability, the ethical value of a bizonal, bicommunal federation. I'll just say two things on this. Firstly, as far as I can see, bizonalism is redolent of the Cold War, should have no place in the European Union of today. Bicommunalism is a euphemism for biracialism. What the negotiations are striving to achieve is the racial purity of the North, through it becoming the Turkish Cypriot constituent state, and the racial purity of the South, so it becomes the Greek Cypriot constituent state. This is anathema to European values. It's anathema to British values. It's akin to calling North London the Protestant part of this country, and the South is the Muslim part. Because the definition of a Turkish Cypriot equates to the definition of a Muslim under the 1960 Cyprus Constitution, and the definition of a Greek equates to the definition of a Greek Orthodox Christian. Those are phrases. We should all be proud of our religion and our racial background, but racialism and racial criteria should have no place in the reconstruction of the sovereign state of a European Union country. Now, not only is that anathema in ethical and moral terms, it's also something that flies in the face of the realities on the ground in the Republic. According to the latest census, 21% of the population of the Republic is neither Greek Cypriot nor Turkish Cypriot. With the influx of members of the European Union, such as French, British, Bulgarians, Romanians, with the influx of refugees from neighbouring war zones, with the influx of Russians and Norwegians and others who've lawfully settled in the Republic, there is no such thing as a bicommunal Cyprus. It's a multi-communal Cyprus. We've also got the Armenians and the Latins and the Maronites. They're excluded from this whole process. So the process itself is defective because it concentrates power in two communities, and it's contrary to European values. And if they ever do reach an agreement, I will support a campaign to take that agreement to court. I will support any attempt to challenge the legality of that agreement. And we have, fortunately, not just the protection of the domestic courts, but we also have the European Court of Justice, or whatever it's called now, the Court of Justice of the European Union, to try and protect our values, because this whole system is completely anathema and contrary to European values. If I may, shall I just conclude with just a few thoughts as to what we can do? Oh, can I just say one last thing on the bizonal, bicommunalism? If it passes, and if there is a bicommunal, bizonal Cyprus, I shudder to think what the growing Muslim, or I should say, the Islamists will be doing in Europe. As far as I can see, the Muslim communities of Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Denmark, and Sweden are growing in size. But that's not the point. The point is that the Islamists, so the Islamists within those communities, are becoming increasingly assertive of their rights. They're calling for Sharia zones initially. But one can imagine, if there's a bicommunal, bizonal Cyprus, they will turn around and say, hang on, we have a precedent in the European Union for a Muslim community to be given their own zone, their own constituent state. Let's have one as well in Belgium. Let's have one in Netherlands. Let's have one in Yorkshire. Let's have one in Tower Hamlets. I fear for the European Union, and I fear for this country if there's a bizonal, bicommunal Cyprus. Right, what can our community do? Well, I'll just rattle through my notes. My notes are self-explanatory. The first thing, Jason, do you want me to shut up or conclude?
No, please continue. Yeah.
I'll try and just whiz through this in 5 minutes. The first thing you need to do is work out whether you want to follow the path of Marina and go into the mainstream political system by joining a political party, playing the political game, following the whip, doing what is necessary to reach the top in politics. Among other things. There's no whip, okay. No whip. Forgive me. I'm thinking of the British parliamentary context. But that's a very serious thing you have to do. And if you do go into politics, you have to realise that there are sacrifices for yourself, for your freedom, for your family. You have to realise that it is a lot of backstabbing, it's a lot of nastiness going on. It can be very rewarding. Can be extremely rewarding. You can make an impact upon the country. You can achieve change up to a point. But that's the first thing you have to decide. Well, I decided pretty early on, but I thought about it. I said, I'm not going to follow that path. I'm going to stay outside the tent. There's a lovely phrase of Lyndon Johnson. You've got to decide whether you want to stand outside the tent peeing in, or be inside the tent peeing out. I've sort of paraphrased what he said. Well, that wasn't quite what he said. But that's the first thing you have to decide. And either way, you can make an impact. You don't have to go into the party structure. You can stay outside the party structure and make a change through pressure groups, through interest groups, through professional bodies, through campaigns and so on. But that's the first thing you have to decide. The second thing you have to decide is, or have to do, is work out where power lies. And there's a great book by Anthony Sampson, who runs this place, which gives you an idea. Power does not just vest in Downing Street or in Westminster or in Whitehall. It vests in the city. You can reach the top of the city and the business community and have an influence over this country. Power to some extent lies in the legal profession. Power to some extent lies in academia. Power to some extent lies in local government. Power to some extent lies in the other institutions of our country. So don't just think, oh, for me to make an impact on politics, I have to join a party. There are ways of activating change outside the party structure. But try and work out where power lies. Thirdly, remember what Dennis Healey said, the great Labour politician, develop a hinterland. Marina has just made a very good point. She's very interested in Cyprus and Greek affairs. But she's interested in the Tamils, she's interested in the health service, she's interested in her local community. Don't just be trapped within one particular cage or one particular subject. Develop a broad array of interests. Become an Aristotelian. Aristotle was interested in dozens of different topics. Develop a hinterland. Fourthly, if you're studying now, study as much as you can. Develop your education. Even if you've stopped your formal education, remember that your education doesn't stop. We're always learning. We're always learning. Develop additional skills, additional qualifications, additional knowledge. 5, cultivate leadership, management and communication skills. 6, follow the news every day. Watch Newsnight, listen to the Today programme, read political journals of both left and right, listen to keep an eye on the international media. Take an interest in what's going on in America with the presidential election or what's happening in Syria. 7, understand the new as well as the old media. Remember the dangers of all these Facebook things that my students will press buttons, because you will leave a footprint. And when if you go into politics in 10 years' time, somebody in the Daily Mail or in the Sun or the News of the World, the News of the World doesn't exist anymore, will be digging this stuff up. So be careful by what you put on the internet or which emails you send to your friends, because you are accumulating, in contrast to previous generations, an electronic footprint. 8, network. I hate networking, and I never carry a card with me, but network, to build up your contacts here in the Mediterranean, the United States, Australia, around the world. Network. Woody Allen said 80% of success arises from merely turning up. I'm going to meet some interesting people later. I'll develop my network by being here. 9, embrace the values of this country and the values of the European Union, which in origin, there's the great Parthenon over there, owe their origin to ancient Athens. The European Union, according to the European Union Treaty, is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights, including the rights of minorities. Those are rights, those are values which owe their philosophical origins to Athens, even though they practice slavery. But don't be afraid to change career. 11, subject to the libel laws and other constraints on freedom of expression, don't be afraid to rattle cages. Remember, that's how Churchill made his name. Churchill made his name by rattling cages and exercising moral courage. 12, cultivate your character, know your limitations, don't always follow the crowd. 13, this is crucial, absolutely crucial, conduct yourself with honour and integrity, maintain your philodimo. Act lawfully as well as ethically. Our MP here, David Burrows, local MP, he was one of the few angels in the expenses and allowances scandal. The other one was Kelvin Hopkin, the MP, the Labour MP for Luton. So I'll use 2 examples from the 2 main parties. Now they've come out of that. They came out of that scandal honourably because they acted ethically as well as lawfully. Many other MPs, they acted within the rules, but they covered themselves in dirt in the process. Others acted outside the rules and ended up in jail. So act honourably and ethically, and have a community spirit. Have a sense of what you're doing this evening, Jason and your colleagues, is you're putting something back into society, and that's you should do that because it's a good thing to do. It can also pay dividends in a political sense or in a career sense, because it looks good on your CV if you show that you have a community civic spirit. You do things because it's the right and moral and virtuous thing to do. And lastly, because I'm a lawyer, I have to put a sweep up. Subject to the above, do whatever else is necessary to achieve your ambitions. And as David Lloyd George said, don't be afraid to take a big step when one is indicated. You can't cross a chasm in 2 small steps. So have courage, be audacious as and when the case is needed. And above all, you're only alive once, enjoy it, seize the opportunities that exist, and try and in your respective careers succeed in your career, but have an eye on the political process.
So moving on finally to Anna.
My grandfather came over in the 30s, met my grandmother during the war in a factory making aircraft parts in Birmingham. And it was a real love story. I think they ran away to Scotland and got married. And I'm the grandchild, one of the grandchildren. On the other side, my father came over in the 50s, when he was 14. So I'm one of the ones that doesn't speak Greek. And I actually grew up in Cockfosters thinking myself as English. And I learned very early on that being female and Cypriot were not a good combination, especially with the way that my brain worked, and I always wanted to be a journalist. I loved politics, and I thought I was going to go into politics until I actually did become a journalist, and I'm sorry to say that I actually got very disillusioned with politics. But I was very privileged when I became a journalist as a trainee on the Enfield Gazette. Michael Portillo had just become MP, and the last time I saw him, he was Defence Secretary and I was working in Bosnia. And he looked at me and I went Enfield Gazette, and we sort of followed each other's careers. Obviously, he did much better than I did. I made a documentary in 1990 about the relatives of the missing. And that was a really interesting experience. I'd managed to get a production company involved. I got all sorts of promises from the committee for the missing. We got to Cyprus and we were refused access to everything. And we made the documentary. It went down well, but I decided that was it. Never work with children, animals, or Greeks. But having said that, I'm aware of my Greek roots. And when I went to Woodhouse Sixth Form College, a lot of Greek Cypriot students there, and I got more into the sort of issue and have been dipping in and out of the issue over the years. I've covered the story as the resident Greek in the newsroom, so I was probably the only one at the time. I was the one that used to get sent out to Cyprus to cover the stories, so I've covered missile crises and fires, all sorts of things. And I'll say now, the biggest Cyprus problem at the moment is that nobody's listening. And that's a real problem. And it doesn't matter how many times I'd suggest stories, the only way you're going to get the news interested here is if it involves the British bases, British expats, or holiday makers. That's it. You know, the World Service, much, much better about covering the issue, but we'll come on to that in the workshop. Really interesting to hear what everyone's had to say. During my career, it was quite interesting. I'd get calls from the Cyprus High Commission, and I'd get calls from the representative from the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, and I knew then I'd done a good story because I'd got both sides down pat. And they both knew what we were going to say, and they both knew the other, each other's arguments. But they had to make their sort of views felt. So it's actually the biggest problem. I mean, words are really, really important. And as someone who's made a living out of words, I can't stress now more than ever, you've got to think of a new form of words to actually get this issue over. And we'll come to the workshop, a new way of doing things. I think actually at this stage, that's really all I want to say, because what I'm going to do with you by the end of this afternoon is hopefully have challenged you. I am going to be the devil's advocate here, and some of you who are doing law, hopefully you'll enjoy some of the debate. I'm hoping the cameras will be switched off for this, because we'll see what comes out of that. And by the end of it, as an organisation, you'll have some ideas about how to move things forward and get it into the media.